Welcome to the Robin King Lifestyle channel here on YouTube. We are going to do something we've never done before, and that is that I am going to have a guest with us. A friend is going to join me, and we're going to tackle this topic of racism, a Christian response to racism, to this topic that's been highlighted and that's getting a lot of attention now. It's not something new, but I think there's something that the Lord wants to do in this time, in this season, speaking about this very old thing now, and we trusting that even through this conversation, as we model something for you of how to even engage with one another on it, that we would, that we would find hope, in the Lord, and that the Lord would be able to bring healing and restoration in this time. Right up front, I want to let you know two things. One, this conversation is taking place in the context of a real life friendship where we've dealt with conflict, we've dealt with tension, and we have landed safely on the other side. So there's trust here, and we really want to encourage you to have these conversations with people in your own lives. It can feel so massive. This thing is global. It's all over your screen. It's in the papers. It's everywhere. It's on Black Twitter. But who are you in community with? And we want to encourage you to have a conversation with the people that you are in community with. The second caveat is that we will land on Jesus. We need to land on Jesus. I want to read you a little quote because you'll say, well, why do we need to land on Jesus? Well, this Christian author, her name is Nona Jones. She writes, how can we so strongly believe the sin of Adam passed down through the generations to all of us and therefore requires repentance and salvation through the shed blood of Jesus, but simultaneously hold the view that sin of racism somehow evaporated through the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation only 157 years ago? If a piece of paper can't free us from Adam's sin, a piece of paper can't free us from the sin of racism. It is time for a blood transfusion. And so we know that if we're dealing with any sin, and this is generational sin, if we're dealing with any sin, the only person who took sin upon himself is Jesus, the Son of the world, and the only person who forgives sins is Jesus. And so that is why we will land on Jesus. However, we want to journey with one another. We want to relate. We want to relate honestly. We want to share in one another's pain. We want to share in one another's victories. And so this is why we're having this conversation today. And I have Mr. Robert Duthie with me. Hey, Robbie. How you doing?
Hey, it's good to be here. I'm doing well. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, man, I want to know. I want to let the people know that it's you who initiated this conversation. You asked for this conversation. So why do you want to have this conversation?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think I've just been realizing from my side that although it's come up again recently, it's all over the news. As you said, it's not something new, and I'm really going, how do I respond to this? So I think our conversation is going to be a lot about what is our response, and we're not going to be arguing sort of the validity of certain arguments and trying to find a way to some kind of almost like a doctrinal theological sort of answer, but saying how do we just as people journey through this in this conversation. And on that, I want to say I'm not a theologian, I'm not a pastor. I'm currently studying music, but growing up as a white male in this country, it's been a complicated experience. Growing up with privilege, and so trying to navigate the way forward as a believer. What is my role in society, and that's really why I wanted to have the conversation, because I think we can't ignore it. We need to talk about it. As you say, we land on Jesus, but we want to hear each other's hearts. We want to hear each other's stories and find understanding in that. So that's why I want to have a conversation and encourage others to do the same.
I like that. I think one of the interesting words that you used there was that it's a complicated journey. And I think it's been in our country, the history of our country is a complicated one. And because the history of our country is a complicated one, walking this life out in this nation is a complicated journey. And as I was reflecting on this whole issue and thinking about what we're going to speak about, because you've asked me just to speak about this, I really thought about this thing that I said before, of generational sin and generational things that play out generationally. And I started thinking about my grandmother and my dad, and there was a connection that I found that I hadn't actually seen before. And how it plays itself out is, and you know some of this, but you know, let's go for it. How it plays itself out is, first of all, to say I'm a colored 30-something South African, so that's important just for context. And my gran is Zulu, and she became an orphan at the age of 16, and she lived in Zululand, so you know, out in the sticks. And she decided, okay, well, she's got some cousins that live in Durban, in the city, and obviously, you know, in the city is where the work is. So that's where she went. And this cousin of hers happened to be colored. And with the situation in our nation at the time, and actually really since always, I guess, but specifically in that time, the lighter you were, the more chance you had to get a job. And I mean, at that stage, we had proper classification. So if she were to classify as colored, then she would be able to more easily get a job and get a higher paying job. And so she took her cousin's surname on, her cousin's colored surname. She took that on. She got a job as a nurse, and only her first child, her eldest child, she married a colored man, and only her first child was actually taught Zulu. So he's the only one who speaks Zulu. And actually the others only found out the real story when the second eldest was 30.
Yeah.
So because you must protect you must play the game.
Yeah.
To protect yourself, to feed your family, you must play the game. And then my dad, I'm sort of going down the line. My dad worked in corporate, you know, after there was the season in 96 where teachers got given the package, and he was fortunate enough to get an opportunity in corporate, worked his way up. And because my mom's Afrikaans, he learned to speak Afrikaans, and I watched him over the years play the game of how do you relate to how do you make it in the very male white world? And so language was the key tool that got people's attention, that he could speak their language. And it got him in the door, and it put him in this really awkward space where he had to stand proxy for other Black people, and where he was seen as the better Black, you know, which is like a huge, people often say, like, especially in corporate, but I know in schools as well, kids have this where white people will say to them, I wish other Black people were more like you. You know, almost like there's like a better version, a more palatable version of a person of color, you know, because now you speak nicely, and, you know, we can, these, you're not so Black. And so I watched him play this game. And you know what? When I went into corporate, I played that game. I'm the only child in our family who really is passionate about being Afrikaans. And I'm fluent and obviously have a beautiful accent. And I realized very early on, I started working in the banking world at 21, and honestly was told straight to my face, I don't want to do business with you because you don't know my business. And I was told that I only got the internship job because my dad knows the provincial manager. And I realized that the way, because at that stage, it was 2000s, but it was still very white, the way to get around it was to speak the language. And so I would switch. If I see I'm not getting my way, I'd switch to Afrikaans. And it became such a thing that when I moved from the Eastern Cape to the Cape Town team, I wasn't very popular among my own people, among colored people and Black people, because of this thing that I do. Because it wasn't something that was in their power to do. And they're also trying to get their way. And they started to say, well, you just know your way around old white men. And my sister really took me on about that. My sister is an activist down to the very core of who she is. And she was just saying, you're not helping. Now, bear in mind, this is the 2000s. This is not 1990, whatever. And she was just like, you're not helping. You're not helping. You're perpetuating this thing of there's a better type of person of color. There's a person of color that is more compliant, that is more like, that assimilates better, that knows our ways better. I've been in meetings in boardrooms where everybody speaks Afrikaans. They conduct the entire meeting on Afrikaans where the official business language is English, and have no shame. Have no shame. Like, people need to just get it together. And I really, it took me a while, but I think the switch for me was that is a generational sin of manipulation. It's manipulation. And I had to repent of my own manipulation before the Lord. And yeah, do something very practical, like just not switch. And I speak Afrikaans to my friends who are Afrikaans, who are my actual friends. But yeah, I just, in a business context, in a work context, I just won't do that anymore, because I can't continue to make it okay to make people believe that all they need to do is find the people of color that they can deal with. And they are out there. And then everything will be fine. And then just in my general experience, there's so many things that stand out. And I actually, I think that's part of what's happening, is that when you asked me, I was like, oh, man, I don't want to tell the truth. Like, I don't want to. I don't, especially as a Christian who's going to a multiracial church, you know, where I think because it's multiracial, people don't realize that people of color are making adjustments to be there and to be there well. They're overcoming all these experiences that they've had to just go, I've got to believe the best, I've got to believe the best, I've got to believe the best. And then that person does something that's like, oh, okay. But I've got to believe the best in Jesus. I'm going to believe the best. And so I think with a lot of us, there's this, we'll talk about it amongst ourselves, but we won't actually say, you know what, guys, this thing is happening. This thing is still happening. And there was the one example, actually from this year, that I think I actually was just blown away, because I think as someone who's freelance and not working in corporate anymore, I've been so insulated and isolated, and I don't have those daily experiences as much as I used to. And, you know, now and then in the shop, things will happen and you'll just go, forget it. But this was just so stark. I was like, oh my word, this is 2020. So I go to a friend's a friend's child's birthday. Okay, so it's a kiddie birthday. I'm the only person of color there, which is fine. This person has other friends of color, but just on that day, it was just me. I don't have a problem with it. It's totally fine. And I love children. It's my friend's child. I'm holding my friend's child. That's how it is. So I'm holding the kid, and this older lady, she's like over 60. She comes up to me and she goes, are you the nanny? And I'm like, no. Now, because this has happened to me many times before, you know what's happening. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is not your first rodeo. So you just go, so it's ticking in your head. You're like, okay, here we go. We know how this goes. So I've got to kind of figure out how to, now this is a small house now here, and there are people around, and I don't want to embarrass her. I don't want to embarrass my friend, but like, I'm gonna try to keep myself together here. So I just say, no. And then she goes, now the wheels are spinning. She needs to figure out why on earth there's a person of color in this room right now. So she goes, oh, are you the teacher? I'm like, no, I'm just a person holding a baby. Because I was like, let's just finish it. I was like, look, I'm just a person holding a baby. She kept standing there just staring at me. And then the other lady, who's the granny of this child, realizes, because she also knows that, like, it's like everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows the question on the minds of everyone else. So she goes, no, she's one of the friends from church. And that satisfied the thing, because we have now, as a people, become accustomed to churches having people of different races. But you can't have people of different races in your actual life. Like, that's not okay. That's not okay. You can't have an actual friend who's a person of color, who is just holding your baby. I happen to be feeding the child as well. So, you know, there's an association there. But that is not the first time. And on that very same day, I was told by the grandmother, she just wishes, you know, that other Black people were like me, you know? On the same day in 2020.
Sure.
Like, at a Christian birthday party. Where do you even go with that?
Yeah, man. That's great.
You know what I'm saying? So it's fine. Like, I know I have to deal with I wasn't bitter, because I was like, okay, cool. As a believer, I now have to go, okay, I have to actually tell, you know, I have to have a conversation with this friend of mine. Just let her know, you know, just so that she knows. But I think that's what makes people upset, when people say, why do you still want to talk about it?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Um, I think it's so key, like just to even hear your story, your experience, because I have heard that sentiment of people going like, "Why is this still an issue?" And I think for anyone who's going to be listening to this, the first reaction, especially as a white person, and also just to say, in South Africa we use white, black, and colored, as those are not like racial slurs or anything. But as a white person, you can hear, okay, well, I'm not like that. So, like, can we just move on to the next thing? Which is really not a helpful response, because what we're dealing with here is people's experiences and these trends and what people are calling undercurrents that have been at play for decades, if not like centuries. And so it's not it we can't actually just kind of abscond ourselves of some kind of responsibility to engage because, well, I would never have said that. Um, and I've been doing quite a lot of thinking about this. It's been spurred by this George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I had to go, okay, I need to consider this for myself, and what is my response to this? Because I felt like I didn't want to just put up a social media post and then say, cool, I'm good to go, I'm on your side, guys. And I don't have anything against showing solidarity on social media. But for me personally, I knew that that would have been a kind of easy way out, and I didn't want to do that. And just reflecting back on my life, the two responses that I've seen from white people when racism comes up, when any of these kinds of issues comes up, on the one hand, you've got the kind of idea of like, why is this still an issue? We don't have explicit laws that are oppressing black people. There's no laws that are enforcing segregation. And so why are we still talking about this? Like, how long is it going to take for us to just put this in the past? These people might not be openly racist, but the conversation often, almost as a way of finding common ground, will be complaining about the government, or actually subtly racist comments that come out, like, oh, the way that they behave, talking about black people and stuff like that. And so I've seen that response, and then like on the other side of the scale, I've seen a response of people who almost, they switch sides. So it's like you've got the black community saying there's injustice here, and the white people are still oppressing us to this day. And so the white person goes, okay, well, I don't want to receive this antagonism. I'm going to switch. I'm going to go to your side and say like, yeah, white people are the worst. And actually start to like almost self-flagellate and be like, I hate my whiteness. I regret my whiteness. I don't know what to do with myself. And I mean, besides not being helpful, both of those responses, I actually feel that that second one of taking on all this guilt and hating whiteness and white culture can often be a very thin veil to a heart that's not changed. That person's going like, I'm going to say all these things and say, I support you in that, but actually it's still just so that I can carry on with my life. Not every time, but I feel like that still happens. And so I'm kind of stuck going, I've seen both of these responses. Neither of them are helpful. So what is the other alternative? And that's what we're trying to kind of hash out at the moment. But I think an important thing just to say on this is that a lot of white guys that I know have felt like we can't even join in a conversation because we don't have like all these the past of being oppressed and that kind of thing. And it's not actually a question of because you haven't been offended, like as in I'm talking about like a legal offense, that kind of situation, then you don't have anything to say. Well, I'm here, I'm in South Africa, I'm part of the community, and so I have a responsibility to engage. And I think I also just want to make that point is I really want to hear from both sides, but I want to hear white people starting to have a conversation, and that's to find understanding, because we can't say, okay, well, I haven't suffered, I've grown up privileged. Yes, so what are you gonna do about that? How are you gonna engage with it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Don't you think? I find that often if white people are reluctant to engage, it's the fear of pain. So it's about what that engagement needs to look like. So it's like if you're prepared to engage, with your engagement looking like listening, with your engagement looking like asking questions, with your engagement looking like saying, sure, flip, I didn't know that. If then you can engage. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then once you've engaged in that way, people will be more open to hearing your opinion. The problem is, I think sometimes people see engagement as, well, you need to listen to my opinion, and also I don't want to feel hurt.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel guilt. I don't want to feel shame. And the reality.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but you can finish.
Sorry. I was saying, and the reality is for people of color, they don't have a choice but to engage and feel pain and feel shame and feel guilt.
Yeah.
So go for it.
I think a lot, as you say, fear is a massive part of people wanting to, as long as possible, how much can I stay out of this? How much can I just, protect what is mine? And so I think now this is where, as believers, self-preservation really has to be like nailed to the cross. And to say, okay, Lord, like my life is yours. What does that mean? It means you can't bail out of these conversations and just and the fear of the implications, because oftentimes it's, I guess you could talk about the rioting in America, is that people going, I can't believe they're doing this, they're breaking the law. It's like, well, they haven't been heard up until this point. And so the kind of, I guess what you could say is the accusations or the declarations are becoming louder and louder, because it sometimes feels like people are just blocking their ears more and more, and feeling like it doesn't just have to be this is why I'm a terrible person conversation, but if you see that there's areas in your life which really do need a shift, then we have to be willing to hear that. So I think it's kind of like a fear that we'll lose the moral high ground of our current position that stops us from even engaging in the first place. And I keep coming back to this, sort of picturing it like a marriage, right? These kinds of things in society can be very complicated because it's not just two individuals, but in its essence, it's still about relationships.
Yeah.
It's about person to person engaging as you did in corporate. And now there's all this baggage, all this history that's influencing the way those two people relate. So at its heart, it's still about relationships. And so if you think of a marriage, if someone were to say, I'm hurting, this is when you do these things and the things you've done in the past, this is how I feel, and I can't carry on. For a person to say, like, okay, I'll be over here and you can get yourself together. That's the most painful feeling, for someone to feel like completely abandoned in their struggle. So I think, even just to like really hammer this point in the beginning, to say we have to engage. And I think that's why there's so much pain when someone says Black Lives Matter. If the response is, well, all lives matter, oh man, then what it sounds like to that person is, your problems are not a real problem, because everyone's having a hard time here. And I've seen posts saying like Black Lives Matter isn't saying only Black Lives Matter. And so just to say on that, I think that let's just engage with the current issue that we're seeing, without going, well, and did you know about this, and all those kinds of other things. Just here to find understanding. As a family, we've been needing to work out some relational tensions, being in lockdown for so long, being in the same space. And we watched a teaching about communication and the radical difference between just trying to find agreement or trying to find understanding. Because if you try and find agreement, you're saying, until you think like me, until you basically are me, we can't have unity.
Yeah.
But finding understanding is going, let me understand how you feel at this moment, and let me explain what I'm currently feeling. Yeah.
You know, everyone loses out when we don't engage. White people also lose out on sharing their experience.
Yeah.
You know, and I watched it. I mean, you're thinking of post 94, it's 96, like there's fear of from young people of not getting jobs, young white people of not getting jobs, and leaving the country, going to London for a couple of years just to see and to write it out. There's fear, like I really built relationship, you know, because of the language thing. I really built relationship with these older white men that I was working with, and experiencing their fear and their stress as they are trying to figure out where their place is in the world, figure out where their place is in their family, realizing that I'm heading for 50 and I'm supposed to get my last big promotion and then sit in that job until I retire. And now, like, there's BEE and people are getting promoted above me. People are coming into the company who are people of color, and it just looks like there's no opportunities for me. Is that true? I don't think that it was always true in how the experience played itself out, but the reality was there was this movement into a space that was very white of Black people, and that's real money on the table. That's people who have to send their children to university, who are now going, I don't know how I'm going to send my kids to university. I don't know if I'm ever going to get promoted again. I don't know if I'm even allowed to say hi to someone because of the guilt and the shame of the situation. And if you don't engage, I don't get to share my pain and you don't get to share yours either. And that's the tragedy. And so I actually want to ask you, what is your portion of pain in all this?
Yeah, I think, oh man, it feels like even that is a touchy subject. Like it feels like an eggshells type of situation because there's so much pain from like the Black and colored communities from the past that it feels like if I say I've had some pain and it's been difficult, then it feels like how dare you even like voice that when there's all this other pain. But that being said, I think from my side, it's more just a confusion about my place in this country, because we've come from a history of the whites dominating in government and in business and basically every sphere of society, and that thing being turned around. And obviously there's still like things are still playing out today. So I'm not saying it was like all sorted out then, but now it's going. I'm like, it feels like if I try and be confident in myself or have a voice or try and even like be someone in society, that I'm kind of perpetuating those things of the past. So I guess the difficulty for me is I mean, there has been a question of the BEE situation and will I not get a job, because I think white males are on the lowest like rung of the BEE compliant thing. But that being said, as you mentioned, like in the real experience, most white males are still like getting a higher education, a tertiary education. So the BEE, I think it has actually more of an effect of these guys who've been working in a job like for 30 years and now they didn't have that pension that they're banking on. I think for young guys, we don't have the barriers that most young people grow up with in this society. So yeah, I think I wouldn't say the pain from my side hasn't been because I've been oppressed. That hasn't happened. But it's now going. I'm in a country where a lot of people would prefer it if I wasn't here.
Sure.
Um, I'm in a country where I, I I feel like I don't know my place, and that's the real struggle. Yeah, in terms of like material upbringing, all of that hasn't been an issue. So I think, yeah, it's more of a thing of looking forward. How, and now even as a Christian in the church, going, um, how do we follow the call of God, um, dealing with political issues and social issues without without the church becoming just a vehicle for political views.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. It's quite hectic. No, I don't want to move past that too fast, because I think you said feeling like you're living in a country where you feel like people would rather not have you there. And so if I multiply that and say, sure, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of white people walking around with that, carrying that, who may not be believers, who may not be able to anchor themselves in the word and anchor themselves in the Lord and anchor themselves in good community, etc. And going, what kind of defensiveness and aggression must that breed in you?
Yeah.
If you feel like you're living in a country where people would rather not have you there, you will feel like you have to fight for every scrap that you have.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, as a person of color, if you then feel like, man, we were just getting freedom, but these people are fighting for all the scraps and no one's letting anyone get in anywhere. It just breeds what we have. Aggression, arrogance, manipulation, fear, from all sides. Everyone stuck.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very sad. It's very sad.
And I think at this point, it's probably a good idea to touch on how social media has played a role in all of this, because what you're kind of talking about is this feeling of like we're enemies. That's that underlying thing that comes up when you have the sense of I shouldn't be here, or people don't want me here, but this is all I know. So we could never be on the same page because of that feeling, that sense of we're on such a fundamentally different starting points. And so then social media comes into the picture, and what you have is I think social media has done an exceptionally effective job of destroying conversation and discourse, working our way through complicated topics and issues in a way like this. The kind of conversations that would happen in person just don't happen on social media, and now it becomes such a like a core part of people's understanding of the world.
I'm
And
going
all
to
you get
disagree with you there.
flaming arrows of sentiments that the most outrageous thing, the most I guess controversial thing, will be the most widespread. And so what that does is it polarizes everything. I mean, people have spoken about identity politics, and in America, I don't want to get too much into that, but the world is becoming, it feels like, increasingly divided, as our ability to just have a conversation with people who are different to us and with people who have a different opinion to us, that even skill is sort of being robbed from us.
So I'm going to disagree with you slightly. So I think that what you're saying is true, but I think actually people weren't engaging and talking before social media. They just decided they're going to stay in their camps.
Mm.
So there was no platform where someone could raise their voice, where, for example, with like fees must fall, no one would, in real life, no one would speak up for the cleaners. No one would do that. Where would they do that? And so it's twofold. It's, oh my word, we can finally have these conversations, and I can say my piece, and I can finally just say my piece and to have it be there. And you can look at it and you can respond to it if you want to. But it's out there. But because in real life, we don't follow through, it becomes this bite-sized thing that just flares up and becomes polarized. And so now I say that thing or I read that thing on social media, then I go into my real life and I see it and I'm shocked, but I don't deal with the person. I don't deal with the relationship. I don't talk. And so I go back onto social media. I've seen this and this and this and this and this and this. Then I go back into my real life. And then Susie, who was saying something racist on social media in my office, is super nice to me, saying, "Oh my word, your hair looks so nice." And then on we go. So I think that social media has shown us what is there in the hearts and the minds of people. And it's ugly. It's the ugly truth.
Yeah.
But
I
the
hear what you're
problem is
saying.
in real life, we're not following through in real life.
Yeah. So I definitely agree that, I guess, social media has provided an outlet and a platform for people who previously had almost like they had been silenced and with no way of being heard. I think, as you say, when there's it feels like such a massive disconnect with the dialogue that's happening on social media, which, as you also said, like it sometimes just tends to boil down to like just like quips and comments and aggressive statements, that's polarizing. So we're not actually seeing a lot of modeling of like healthy discourse, and I think that's why it feels like, I don't know, maybe I'm just more aware of it, but it feels like there's been a somewhat of a resurgence of people sitting down and having really long conversations and it going on the internet. Things like podcasts, I think of the Joe Rogan show, where these things will go on for hours. And guys like Jordan Peterson, whether you agree with what he's saying or not, because people are like starving for a more sort of nuanced understanding of these kinds of issues, where it felt like there was a time where it just kind of spiked and all people were going to the internet for was the latest like crazy piece of sensational news and entertainment, that kind of thing. And so that, I guess that's nice to see, is that people are realizing again that no, we need to have these conversations. But just as you say, like, internet conversations aren't enough. So like we could step out of this and then go back to our lives and just like, again, wave at that person that you don't know or don't have a different background to. But actually we need to go, how does it affect me and the people I know? Because we can be all for change at a societal level, at like a governmental level. But we've seen that already, that you can change the laws, but if individual hearts are not changed, we're in the same place that we've been before.
And hearts in the real world and relationships in the real world. And I mean, I didn't tell you this, but the only reason I said yes is because I know that you're already doing this work. I know that in your real life, you're already engaging with students of color. You're already thinking about these things and have been thinking about these things for a couple of years, and looking at yourself, yes, but also actually building relationships with people of color. And I think if we can invite people to one thing, is relate in real life. relate to people, engage with people in real life, and actually hear what they have to say and hear their stories and tell your own. But what is the hope, Robert? I was thinking in prepping for this, I was thinking about this movie that I watched on YouTube. It's called The Blood of the Lamb. It's a documentary about the fastest growing church in the world, which is the Iranian church. So it's a Muslim nation, and they are the nation that are openly saying, we are going to destroy Israel. Like, just openly, they are going to do that. And so on the ground, what you should have is that Iranians should be arch enemies of Jewish people. That's how it should be. And what they're seeing as the church is growing, as they don't have buildings, they don't have, because you're not really allowed to be a Christian. But as people are getting saved, they're experiencing this deep love for Israel as a nation and for the Jewish people.
Come on.
That's the power of the gospel. That's the hope. That's what I'm excited about. I'm excited about, as we do the work, before we do the work, as we respond to the gospel, get saved, come under Jesus Christ, let these things rise up, commit to relationship with one another within the body of Christ, that God will supernaturally stir up a love, like a deep love for one another. And they're saying that when Iran starts to destroy Israel and the Israeli people have to flee, they're saying that it's actually going to be the Iranian Christians that provide safe harbor.
Yeah.
That's the hope. That's the hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've certainly thought in my life before, like, it feels like no one in the world has experienced, or no country in the world has a history like ours. And it is unique in many aspects, but the animosity between ethnic groups and races and all of that has been around for centuries. And so I was reading about the context of the early church, with the Romans and the Jews, and I suddenly had this like revelation, like, the Romans in that time, the Roman Empire was literally oppressing the Jews. Like, they were in government. They had all these laws restricting how Jews could be. And then when the church was formed, there wasn't a big building that you could go to, and that was like a safe haven. It was like in people's homes, and they were wrestling this whole thing out of, I'm a Roman, and now I'm in the same body of Christ as this Jew, with vastly different like backgrounds, like the way that they've been educated, the way they've been taught to think, the worldviews, all of these different things. And then reading some history, I heard about the Emperor Claudius. He had a certain law basically that kicked Jews out of Rome for about 5 years, and then he died, and so they were able to sort of reamalgamate. But what happened there is the Gentiles, Christians, stayed behind and would have had these house churches, and then the Jews would have come back and sort of reassimilate into the Christian, into these house churches, and I can only imagine what they must have been like for both the Jews and the Romans. It's like your fellow believers are being kicked out of the city because of their race, basically, because of their faith, because of their ethnic group, just because the government doesn't like them, basically. And so in Jesus, like, Paul was writing, like, we have to have one mind and one spirit, and he speaks about the benefits of how the circumcision doesn't apply when we're in Christ, and so it's a messy process. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it's not a clean cut situation. I had my, before I met Christ, then I met Christ, and now everything's simple. It's actually, it gets, in some ways, it gets more complicated, because before I could do things, however I wanted. I could live my life, and if someone is different to me, well, I'll just put them out of my life. I keep seeing these messages on social media about getting rid of toxic people in your life, and I think, like, if Jesus had done that,
Yo.
like, no one would be saved. Like, he went to those toxic people and said, like, I can change you if you trust in me. And so, anyway, what I'm saying is that when we come into our faith in Christ, it's going to get more complicated. And yet, it's such a beautiful opportunity to represent the love of Christ. And going back to what you were saying about in Iran, I was thinking about the Welsh revival. It happened at the last turn of the century. So it's in 1904 or something, somewhere around there. And a society that was just like twisted with alcohol abuse, with crime, with violence. As the gospel came, and as people in the hundreds and thousands repented and turned to Christ, the society reflected the change that had happened in people's hearts. And I think this is why I've been really wrestling with, okay, I've been called to preach the gospel, to see hearts change. But then I don't know what I'm called to do on a societal level, on a governmental level. Because the society should reflect the people that are in it. Otherwise, why as Christians do we vote? So I don't know, this is now getting into something that's a very gray area, but what is our role as Christians to the laws of the land and to injustices that we see around us, without becoming consumed by and devoting our lives to a just cause, which isn't, it's good, but it's not the call of Christ. Yeah, sorry, that was a long one.
No, I think the issue is that change of heart. When we come to Christ, we're saved, and then the Bible says we're being saved, which is the process of sanctification, and we will be saved on that last day. And the part here in the middle where we being saved is the part where we're relating to one another and where we are unrefined in so many ways. And so for me, it's less about how I, or rather, I'm taking my involvement in society and my involvement in social injustice. I think as a believer walking out their walk, I'm going, unless the Lord calls me to the macro level, I'm not there, and it's very hard to do anything about it. But on the micro level, am I loving well? Am I loving well? Am I reflecting, as you're saying, Welsh revival, gospel sweeps through, and the city reflects the change of heart? Am I pursuing a heart change? Am I pursuing sanctification on all levels, in many various ways? When someone is saying to me, sure, Robs, I really think you struggle with pride, am I taking that seriously and pursuing sanctification in the Lord so that I reflect Jesus more fully? When someone is saying, your racism is hectic in South Africa, am I going, okay, this person is saying we're not relating very well as a people. Am I part of this? Am I part of the problem or the solution? Micro, in my own life, micro level. Am I reflecting the gospel in my workplace, in my classroom at school, in the moms group that I attend? When I'm in the queue at Home Affairs, am I reflecting the gospel? That is what it looks like, I think, for us to straddle that line of, I have given myself to Jesus. I've given myself to reflect him. I've given myself to having him transform me. Now, how he chooses to prod me and prompt me could be through some social media post that says there's still racism in the country, or someone saying to me, sure, I didn't like the way you said that. How the prompts come is his decision. But I'm giving myself to becoming more like Jesus.
Yeah, so good. In my processing this whole thing, I just had such a almost like a clearer understanding that my life, if my life is a letter to the world, in Christ, as an ambassador of Christ, how could I let that letter be one of disaffectedness? That's a message. That's a powerful message that your life can, and your life is a message to people. Whether you think, you're not very outspoken, your life is a message to people. And as you say, on that micro level, I've been feeling such an urgency for Christians of all colors. But I'm thinking about like my community, like the white Christians, to go into God's presence and say, God, here's my heart. Would you cut me with the suffering that remains in this country, to the point that I pour out my life for the bride of Christ and for the lost. It's almost like unless we go into God's presence and allow him to put the anguish on us, the anguish that he has, the suffering that he sees. I mean, we can talk ourselves into circles and try and find, the right belief, the right doctrine on these things. But I'm just remembering the scripture where in Matthew 7, Jesus speaks about many who say, Lord, Lord, and they'll have done all these different things. They'll have prophesied, they'll have healed the sick, cast out demons, but they don't know me. I think, and then the other scripture on the flip side is the one where Jesus says that what you do for the least of these, you do for me. That we can be thinking, okay, I'm doing the right thing. This is my worldview. I've taken this understanding, and okay, I don't agree with that. I do agree with that. Okay, now I've got something I can work with. But actually, if your heart remains unmoved by the suffering that you see, I think Jesus will say, what you didn't do for the least of these, you didn't do for me. So that's kind of my plea, is that every believer just forget about trying to find the right or wrong and the agree or the disagree, and say, Lord, move me at my heart for what's happening in people around me.
And I think for those who are suffering to say, or who are in pain, to say, Lord, you've taken, by his stripes we are healed. Like you, I need you. I'm bringing this to you. Set me free. Let me walk in freedom, no matter what other people are saying or doing. Let me walk in freedom. Guys, we hope that was insightful. That it stirred you to have conversations in your own life, in the macro, the people that are in your life. If you don't have any people of color in your life, which I know is very possible still in our nation, please, that is also something to look at. I think just consider it before the Lord. And if you're in a relationship with people of color and you actually are scared of having this conversation, consider that before the Lord. On both sides, there are people of color who really do not want to have this conversation with their church friends, for fear even of being unchristian. But we really want to encourage you to bring your hearts before the Lord and then share your hearts with each other. Jesus said, Father, may there be one as we are one. And oneness requires a real depth of intimacy. And so let's go after that for his name's sake. Let's go after that for his glory. And I want to say, if you're not saved, think about Jesus. Ask him if he's real. Ask him to show up. Ask him to show himself to you. Speak to a friend who you know knows about Jesus. Write me a message in the comments, and I'll engage with you on that as well. But he is the hope of the world. He is the hope of the world.